I'm live. Wow. The lighting is kind of funky, though, isn't it? Hey, everybody, this is Dr. Mike.org. This is a video portion of Mike's Mastermind.com, which is typically a audio podcast. But lately, we've kind of been exploring some deep stuff. So I thought, well, why don't we dive into it? So I'm working on phenomenology, which is social philosophy in the sense that studying our experiences, what we observe and what we're aware of. And I've shortened it to the phenom as a way to express it as the here and now, the experience that we're having of an experience and who we are that's showing up in the conscious recognition of it as being a part of it. Now that's kind of deep stuff, but what does it lead to? Anyway, let me just first say that you can find this current writing. I don't think I put it in the description, so because I'm talking about what will be the next book on quantum consciousness. But for us to get there, we ought to start with the phenom, which understanding the here and now. So PHENOM book.com, so phenombook.com will take you to my current writing, which is about 80% done. But it's there. It just needs to be tightened up, references added, that kind of stuff. So when we refer to quantum consciousness, what we're referring to is either the quantum mind, and it really is a scientific hypothesis that suggests that quantum mechanical phenomena like superposition and entitlement, which is strictly physics, and you can relate it to a bunch of other things. What I'm referring to is something that's occurring within the brain that once realized or discovered can potentially play a fundamental role in the emergence of consciousness that we are experiencing as humans. So I think that's something for us to consider in our dialogue and what we're going to talk about. And when we explore this, we're potentially explaining aspects of our subjective experience that classical physics alone cannot account for. And so in this regard, the theory remains highly controversial, and it's largely unproven because even if I'm having an experience, I relate to it in some quantum mind dynamic, like what is this consciousness or qualifying enlightenment? It's very individualistic. And while there are prominent proponents like Roger Penrose and Stuart Hamroff who are proposing that there are quantum events happening, and they've I guess modeled it or demonstrated within microtubules like inside neurons, that's so beyond my conception. What I'm relating to is an approach that we can appreciate consciousness and within your own experience, recognizing something of a dynamic that brings you to the forefront of awareness. And what that experience is, which is very individual to you, is something that we're going to explore. And so we're not quite ready to take the big leap into what the quantum is, what quantum consciousness is, and to relate it on that level, particularly in physics. No, what we're going to do instead is just talk about consciousness in the way that we can best relate to it. And that's what this series, I guess, lead the way. And hopefully it'd be something of interest to you and something that you'll appreciate. So again, you can find the current writing about phenomenology at phenombook.com. So it's PHENOM book.com. And hopefully it's something that you'll find like, oh, this is pretty cool. And we'll take it from there. So just for a moment, though, let's explore what potentially quantum mind or quantum consciousness is, or at least what is theorized at this point, that's proposing that local physical laws are still recognizing, the neurobiology, mind, body, potentially soul or spiritual dynamic, that there's some interaction that accounts for classical mechanics or some connection between what neurons alone cannot explain, which is this debate's been going on for hundreds of years now, to what is consciousness. So now we're looking at positing instead that there's a quantum mechanical phenomena that's happening. And again, I'm not a physicist. So when we talk about ideas like quantum entanglement, and a superposition where I can be here and there at the same time, and maybe there's parallel universes or recognition of consciousness. That's so beyond me understanding whatever that would be, that's causing these non-localized quantum effects. Now, as we develop in future talks, maybe we'll have guests that can explain that part that features what is happening, you could say, what I like to call is branular, like branular, and something that is a phenomena in itself that kind of goes beyond just the cells or neurons or pathways. Do you know what I'm saying? So there's sort of this network happening. What is exciting it? Where is the electrical pulses coming from? Where is this realization? How does consciousness show up? I mean, that's amazing to try to explain it on that level, because you would have to sort of say, well, what's the important part in the brain's function that could explain these critical aspects of how we show up, to recognize things, to have an awareness, to be able to communicate and have a language, and a shared reality that exposes something of the phenomenon, which is this here and now be able to explore it even deeper. So from different perspectives, we are looking at different scientific, whether it's psychology, chemistry, biology, different scientific hypotheses that are still not yet validated. And they can overlap with what's being described as quantum mysticism. So you say, well, what's that? Well, quantum mysticism is sometimes referred to pejoratively as a quantum quackery or the quantum woo. It could be related to new agey metaphysical beliefs and associated practices that relate spirituality or mystical worldviews to the ideas of what quantum mechanics stand for, and therefore has its own interpretation. So there's something to start from. Now, for those of you who are into physics or neurobiology and want to understand some things better, you can search this stuff on whatever your favorite platform is, Google, or go into Wikipedia or some kind of academic websites, whatever research there is. So let's just talk about consciousness itself. And so when we relate to it in just its basic form, simplest recognition, it's simply awareness, right? So what is awareness? Well, it's some kind of state, you could say, so a state of my being. And it's also something that you could say I'm relating to, conscious of an object per se, like could be you in the room that I'm talking to, or watching an object within an object, like a TV, and or on screen a video, and in the video there are other objects. And I have some internal recognition of that to give it a name and to recognize what that is. And in that sense, what we're talking about has led through millennia, right, from the ancients, from traditions, spiritual paths, religions, however way you want to look at it. Tons of analysis, explanations, and debate, particularly among scientists, and philosophers, and theologians, right? The opinions will differ about what exactly needs to be studied or even considered to be conscious. Like, what is conscious? Who am I? And what am I conscious of? And what does this consciousness relate to, right? So in some explanations, it's synonymous with the mind. And other times, it's an aspect of it, right? Like what's happening inside the brain. And some people argue, well, that's all there is. So as one, you could say, is experiencing an inner life, we could say this is the world of introspection, of private thought, one's imagination, and one's volition, the ability to abstractly explore and to ascertain ideas that then we could relate to maybe what would eventually we would define, which is filtering into what could be described as quantum consciousness. Now, at the base level, if you've been following my talks at mikesmastermind.com, I attribute a lot of my ideas to different sources and people that have been influences. And I've kind of created sort of the meshed idea where we created a fabric that we can then position ourselves to understand within the interweaving of these ideas, the experience that maybe perhaps can be explained or better considered within this realm of thought or really what is introspection. And introspection can be defined as the examination of one's own consciousness, right? Because what else there is? You're experiencing this awareness, and to have some I-awareness, as Dr. David Judd would often talk about, is to be conscious of your own thoughts and your feelings. I reckon it to the TWA, the flight we take every day. I love acronyms, as you know. If you don't, I love them. And TWA stands for thoughts, words, and actions. That's the flight I take every day. It's a reflection of my attitude and my altitude. And as I'm aware of what it is that I'm thinking, the quality of the words that I'm using, and how I'm acting or actualizing self, this is a process that in psychology is called introspection. And in this process, it relies on the observation of one's own mental state. And of course, in a spiritual context, it may refer to an examination of how I am ultra being, maybe in reflection of this sense of spirit or soul. And so introspection is really closely related to human reflection. And I will do a whole talk just on this because I've had the experience being around some really amazing thinkers and teachers who relate introspection in such a way of self-reflection that it really does open up another dynamic that's worthy of its own talk. Anyway, given the wide range of research notions and speculations about what is consciousness and awareness, it raises curiosity, at least for me, about whether the right questions are being asked. Because we all are conscious. Now, whether we give it a label and say this is part of a tradition, a path, or my own thing, and then we're going to teach it in a course, and then you get certified. Well, there's different dynamics that play into my own thinking. So let's just talk really quick about what's out there in the wide range of descriptions. These are definitions, and the explanations are ordered. They're ordered in a distinction of syntax, a lexicon, which is kind of like definitions of its own dictionary, that we could qualify as making the distinction between self and the environment. I described as this nest fabric, and MEST just stands for simple physics of what any scientist will tell you is it in the physical reality. MEST, matter, energy, space, and time. And I relate it on a psychic or psychological level of what's the matter, what is this energy or emotional dynamic, and the space that's felt between us in the metasphere on a very intimate level that's going to allow us to engage. And then on a more dynamic world building level, I call it the Weltschloss, two German words, which really literally is the world dwelling experience, because we've built this, could say construction of reality, and we've named it, we've termed it, it's been built for the most part. And we're using tools and things that are constructed, and the way we relate to them then sort of play back into the MEST reality that then affect how I relate to myself in time. And of course, the German philosopher Heidegger, in his great work, Being in Time, kind of reflects on this. So yes, being in the role of a social philosopher in the way that I'm trying to look at things from a dynamic level of a social scientist relating social psychology. And not that I'm any expert of it, I'm just curious about it. So let's talk a little bit about the roots, origins, and etymology of conscious and consciousness. So in the English language, it dates to the 17th century, and the first recorded use of the word conscious as a simple adjective was applied figuratively to inanimate objects, right? In 1643, there was a book called The Conscious Grove. And I don't know if I'll be able to put a link into it, but by Faber. So it derived from the Latin conscius. So con means together, and scio means to know. So bringing together some kind of knowing, which meant knowing with, or having some kind of joint or common knowledge with another, especially in sharing a secret. And this is written about in Thomas Hobbes' work at Leviathan. And Leviathan was written in 1651. And the quote, "Where two or more men know of one and other of the same fact, they are said to be conscious of it, one to another." So there are many occurrences in Latin writings of the phrase conscius sibi. Now, I don't know Latin, I don't speak it, but basically it translates literally as knowing with oneself. Or in other words, sharing knowledge within oneself about something. And we all do think, right, and consider things. Now, on another level, we might call this concentration, contemplation, because we're literally contemplating, like the thinker in the ancient Greek statue. So when there's something like this about knowing what one knows, which is the phrase that, in a figurative sense, was sort of something that was said in early, we could say, modern language, English, that came about the word conscious. But it was also rendered into English as conscious to oneself or conscious onto oneself. For example, the Archbishop Usher wrote in 1613 of being so conscious unto myself of my great weakness. So stuff that's pretty profound going back to the 1600s. Wouldn't it be cool to have a time machine, just in this conscious wrecking, have this, imagine the Gendanken word experience, thought experiment of what it would be like to have a conversation with these people. So the Latin word conscientia literally means knowledge within. And that word first appears in Roman, I guess it was probably juridical texts. It was juridical texts that were written by writers such as Cicero. And it means a kind of shared knowledge with moral value, specifically what a witness knows of someone else's deeds. Although Rene Descartes, somewhere, in the, well, I don't know when he wrote it, but he lived from 1596 to 1650, writing in Latin, is generally taken as to be the first philosopher to use the word conscientia in a way less like the traditional meaning and more in the modern way that English speakers would use conscious. And his meaning is now sort of defined in this regard, So in Search After Truth, Descartes wrote the word with a gloss. Now, I can't pronounce really well, so excuse me, right? Because conscientia vel intermo testimonio. So let's just past life recollection of what he said to me. So it's translatable as conscious or internal testimony. Think about that. So I'm being conscious of something. And I'm saying to myself, it is my own testimony to myself. So I don't want to lie to myself, but this is maybe all that I know and what I'm conscious of. So it has to be some kind of some kind of recognition of it. So it might mean the knowledge of the value of one's own thought in consideration of something. And to me, it relates back to I-awareness, that I'm going to have some consideration that I'm having a thought and to be I-aware of the thought. And then to the quality of the words that I'm using in regards to how I'm aggregating this information. And this way I have to be relating to my own act. Go, oh, that couldn't be true. Or, no, you have to agree with me. Or, gee, I wonder how I'm appearing to this person or how they have a regard to these ideas when I don't have any know. So it's knowingness. It's just conjecture. And it might not even be in the consideration or in that person's awareness, even to begin with, on any kind of relatable level. So we're going to wrap this up here in just a minute, but I just wanted to relate that the origin of the modern concept of consciousness is often attributed to John Locke, who defined the word in his essay concerning human understanding, literally the name of it, Essay Concerning Human Understanding, that he published in 1690. I'll tell you, the 1600s, I'm telling you. So he related to as the perception of what passes in a man's own mind. Incredible, right? So the essay is strongly influenced by 18th century British philosophy, and Locke's definition appeared in Samuel Johnson's celebrated dictionary in 1755. Man, that's got to be a collector item there if you got the original copy of that. So the French term conscience, or concise, I guess pronouncing it like the English consciousness, is found in the 1753 volume of Diderot, version of, and D. Albert's Encyclopedia, like encyclopedia, as the opinion of one internal feeling that we ourselves have from what we do. I'll repeat that. The opinion or internal feeling that we ourselves have from what we do. So there's a doing and there's a reflection, right? And that would be some recognition of consciousness. Now I like to relate to ultra being. So there's evolution, whether we can relate to it to as Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the pyramid, where we get out of struggle, strife, survival, and to get our needs met on certain levels to where we can be a bit more, you could say, aware in this consciousness pursuit that leads to self-actualization. And then it's been described in the hierarchy of needs, by the later work of talking about a transcendence. So what would this be like? Would that then lead to quantum consciousness because we get out of our own stuck stories that formats some illusion of self? And I've written a bit about this in a couple of ways. igoresearch.com is what I've named the selfie of the mind. And just a couple months ago, after about 18 months, finally convinced the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office that it's worthy of the trademark, being the R. It took a while and had to sort of make the argument for it, but I think it's pretty solid that we're living through a projection in our mind of who we perceive ourselves to be, and it's an illusion, not illusion, an illusion. Well, illusion is something that we are projecting as our persona, and this identity is formatted in how we perceive ourselves. So it's a self-imagining the self. It's an action that then is relating to ourselves and how we construct, and it's through schemas and upbringing, conditioning, and socialization, and just a perception and what we've learned in conceiving of identity, which if you look at my work, ID, I relate to in my acronyms as internal dialogue. And again, being other than aware or conscious makes us think that we are probably in the mass trance, the hypnosis of society, masstrance.com. And other than aware, which is a bit, to me, of morbidity, it's the modus operandi of rational behavior or relational being that's other than aware of its internal dialogue. So morb.masstrance.com for that writing. So there is a problem of this definition, right? Scholars are divided to whether Aristotle had a concept of consciousness. He does not use any single word or terminology that's clearly similar to the phenomenon or concept defined by John Locke, right? So let's just clear again, relating to my current work on looking at the phenomenon. So it's phenombook.com. So PHENOM book.com. So a phenomenon, sometimes it's spelled in variations, is an observable event, right? And the term came into its modern philosophical usage through Immanuel Kant, who contrasted it with the noumen, which cannot be directly observed. And of course, Kant was heavily influenced by Gottfried Leibniz. My God, that guy, pretty incredible. Talk about the monad and different inferences that I look at what the morb might be and what identity shows up that's other than aware completely of its thoughts, words, and action, because it's functioning perhaps in a robotic way, and yet there is some kind of conscious or some kind of recognition of what it is experiencing, whether it's defined by the outside or given by a peer structure. I write a bit about cringe factors, CRINGE, factors.com, that relates to class, race, individual perception based on income or intelligence, nationality, gender, and a level of engagement based on economic status or ethnicity, however you'd love to associate that with. And also there's ageism, and if you're going to throw in your religious beliefs and things like that, and perhaps political affiliation. I write about what's happening currently as dashes and replace the F with D, because we're at the D, not at the F right now. And dashism is a dementia of some essence and level of consciousness that's reflected in our society right now. And I researched this by examining community conversations, whether they are deliberate dialogues, whether they're participatory in the way that I show up for a conversation for social issues, or I was invited to meet my neighbors, or it's a potluck, or we're going to sit together and have a guest speaker or watch a video and then have a dialogue about it. This is fascinating work to me. And this has been going on for quite some time. I mean, really going back to the ages when we had the commons or the early form of Turkish coffee shops where people talked about the news of the day or related to each other and how things are perceived and had these conversations. I'm looking at a perception of the phenomena of the experience within the experience, so there's a recognition of what is occurring. And this dimension, if we're going to call it, whether it's messed energy, space, and time. It's formatting itself into the Weltschloss, which is the physical phenomena of a built world that I'm experiencing, my quality and yours, in the way that we're dwelling in it. So this XQ is the marriage of IQ and EQ, right? Intelligence quotient and the emotional quotient that merges left brain, right brain, so we have a whole brain experience of things to where we're enabled to get out of the stuck stories, which is self-liberation, getting out of our stuck stories because I have to reckon it rather than debate you. No one's saying that you're wrong. We're just having a new recognition, and this is the reckon. So it's a deconstruction of our experiences, which is the phenomenology, the science of doing this, whether you call it a science, social science, or a form of psychology or sociology. It is a philosophy that's taking a sense of being as an ontological perspective, that I'm having an experience of myself in the here and now. And whether I attribute my senses to something I'm relating to, it is the phenom. And these concepts, whether defined by John Locke, Victor Kasten, they contend that Aristotle did have a concept more clearly that's similar to perception. So the quality of what we perceive and what's happening in relationship is the organization and identification and interpretation of sensory information that's showing up. And the senses are interplaying here, right? So in the mess dimension, in the way that I was taught, particularly in hanging out with urban shaman, in particular, Dr. David Judd, having a sense of a vestibular sense. And in NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, this is called a kinesthetic sense. And people who tend to be slow talkers and the feelers have to have a sense, maybe being grounded, or just having the sensory feeling first before there can be any kind of, let's say, auditory recognition of what it is that I'm saying to myself about the experience or what it is that I'm feeling or sensing. That's going to then allow me to have a visual perspective so I can really get the big picture, the full picture complete dimensionally. I hope this is understood, because perception in the way that I'm drawing this information and coming into it is going to go through different filters. And a lot of it is going to go to this conditioning, and that's going to relate to a lot of people sort of stuck in the mass trance who have been told what to think and they adopt it. And it's been proven in our own sort of collabs. I'm talking about collaboration laboratories where we have conversations with people and the automatic fixed response of how people have been so conditioned and you could say co-opted, operational conditioning, like, Pavlov's dog, they're operated. Whether it was something that, was found, they're told to respond because they're literally demonstrated for them an example, whether they're watching fake news or conspiracy theories, things that are led by clicking and confirming through an algorithm what it is that's a bias, that they're justified in, even though they don't know the truth and haven't thought through on it. The belief there, the perception is it must be true. And things are presented to them in a way that things are organized, identified, and the interpretation has co-opted the sensory mechanism so that the information that's received is represented in such a way that the only understanding that can be accepted, particularly within the peer structure, is informing that environment which they hope to be accepted in. So they're sheeple and going along with the programming, right? And so all this perception on whatever level we could all agree on, because we all talk about this, it involves signals that go through the nervous system that then in turn result in some kind of physical or chemical stimulation of the neurons, aspects of the brain, the brainular part that I talk about, that then is kind of constructing itself into a consciousness overview. Now, whether we can relate it to different definitions in the modern dictionary or examine how the word consciousness has evolved over the last several centuries, it does reflect a range, really, if you could say, of a quantum level, seemingly related meanings with some differences that have been controversial, such as the distinction between inward awareness and eye awareness of the perception of a physical world, and the distinction between conscious and what is unconscious, right? If we really get into Jung, we can get into archetypes and where is that coming from? And how does that relate to filter into our experience in the here and now? Now we can take it to another level and look at the notion of a mental entity, right? Which is going back now to my ego theory. The ego, again, being the selfie of my mind. We all imagine ourselves. So it's the self imagining the self, again, which is an action which is amazing. That is just not really examined, at least not that I found any great depth on this level of what this mental activity represents as an entity of what I've placed in my mind to represent myself in the experience. Now, this gets pretty deep because if we get into the idea that when we dream, we're having some kind of experience of a world that isn't a dream, and yet it's imagined as being real as the player, either that's in it or observed playing it out. So as we are, follow me here, and just whatever it's going to take, just sort of be with it. That as we come to a conscious recognition, and again, I call it the reckoning. And the reckoning is a very important word because we want to distill the structures of experience, which is understanding phenomenology, which is again in my newest writing, phenombook.com. Plug, but I'm just 80% there. I need feedback. So take it to that next level to get to the quantum consciousness that we're pursuing. That if we can examine that, you could say as a cosmonaut or astronaut, astral experience, we're projecting this identity into some kind of format representing ourselves into our own thought experiments, work, and thinking. Because I'm often thinking, gee, how would it work out if I could actually talk to her, the one who I perceive that to be? So I understand the mechanisms of my own thinking and imagining. And this again is a Gendanken, which is a thought experiment, which is imagining my sense of the experience of the phenomenon, the here and now, and filtered through my existing level of consciousness, which is informing my perception, right? Or you could say it's the other way around. It's like you're perceiving something, and then I'm filtering it. So the quality of that perception to be open and to be sort of unrestricted, because I can deal with whatever the experience is if I'm allowed to conceive it, right? We're not being disrupted, not being made wrong, not being argumentative, to just have a moment. And it can be silence, right? Definitely. As Deepak Chopra often says, true consciousness or this quantumness is within the gap between the words, between the sentences, between the thought. To dwell in this emptiness, as Dr. Java would relate it to and other speakers, opens up the potential because it hasn't been already defined or labeled as Krishnamurti often talked about, that we begin to get so mechanical or lab-like and defining things and specializing was what he was referring to, that we give it a special label to everything else. And of course, I'm doing that. I'm making up a lot of words. I'm using it to define something that opens up a wider picture. And the hope is that through some new terms, I'm talking about the I-go and the metasphere, the felt atmosphere, the vibe between us, as social scientists examining the phenomenon, we can take it apart and examine this world slosh, this world-dwelling experience that we're all having. So again, as we evolve the word and what the modern dictionary defines as consciousness, it has evolved, and I believe as we get to associate, whether through AI or are defining some kind of quantum leap in our association to consciousness as a self-liberation, getting out of our stuck story and defining what this perceived self is going to open something up. And I'm sure many gurus, and whether ancient times or someone who's perceived to have had a breakthrough in questioning enlightenment to understanding it through the experience of it, can't be put into words because it's so individualistic. Yet we can look at some common usage definitions of consciousness, looking at Webster's third New International Dictionary. And of course, the best that I've found so far relates to 1966. And this is what follows. So awareness, with the perception of inward psychological or spiritual fact, intuitively perceived knowledge of something in one's inner self. So let's take it apart before I go on to something relating to this. So it's some kind of awareness of perception of an inward psychological or spiritual fact that's relating to yourself to it, that's intuitively perceived. And you relate it to it as your knowledge or having some awareness of this relating to what's occurring within one's inner self, right? Because this consciousness is yours, of what you're perceiving. Now, some people could say, well, it could be in the quantum level, all of this, and maybe it's omni-awareness or something that we're all sort of tied into, but because I'm embodying my experience, given my persona, my name, and the cringe factor, again, how I'm perceived by class, race, income, nationality, gender role, and ethnicity or my economic status, I'm going to play it out. And also, particularly, my different phase that you are in life, whether it's your age grouping, what level of whatever you are title wise or perceived to be in a company or company you keep or family or school. These are all different things that we might relate to. So it becomes something that we have an inward awareness of an external object, and it can be a state of something that's existing or recognizing it because you're going to have to deal with it. So this relates to then of a concern of awareness, that we now have an interest. And this is often used with an attribute, what's an attribution noun, like class consciousness. Is there such a thing as class consciousness? And are we recognizing this in what I write in dashism or morbid forms, or things that are disattracted, that just sort of distracts people's attention, that they're other than consciously aware, right, of their TWA, the quality of the thoughts and words and the way that they're acting. Now, that was the first one. The second one in the 1966 definition of consciousness in Webster's third New International Dictionary is the state or activity that is characterized by sensation, emotion, volition, or thought. And this is brought to mind in the broadest possible sense that there's something in nature that is distinguished just from the physical, hardcore reality. Although I can have a sense of things in the physical, right? Because I can feel, and the senses are still being filtered through, right? Taste, smell, right? An orgasmic sense of things. It's sort of setting off my neurons and endorphins and so forth, right? But we're looking at this in the broadest possible sense, that there's something in nature that is distinguished from just this outer world that I'm now perceiving on the inside. And that's quantumly profound in itself. Great for 1966. Number 3. The totality and psychology of sensations, perception, ideas, attitudes, and feelings of which an individual or group is aware at any given time within a particular time span. And this can be compared to the stream of consciousness. Of course, we're streaming live right now on YouTube, which will then be a replay. So if you don't know me, I'm drmike.org, and this is my new avatar for the new year, because I'm recording this the 1st of March. And whether we're in the Ides of March, we're going to March 4th. I'm going to talk to my buddy, Les B, and wish him well on that day. Hard to believe he's 80, talking about Les Brown. Because he's, you could say in the regard of Panorama going back the last 30-some years, one of the great influencers in my world. I'm looking for this breakthrough. I'm taking this work on another level. I've been writing about phenomenology, which is the social philosophy of ontology, which is understanding our experience of being. And I'm relating it to ultra being and how it is that we can experience what is a phenomena, which is our here and now experience, and appreciating that we have this gift of the here and now and how we are present. And in this regard, could there be something that we can equate in, what we're calling it, tapping into source, or increasing one's sense of conscious awareness of who shows up in this conversation? What are my thoughts about the quality of the words I'm using to engage? What are the effects in the way that are actualized through my way of acting? And that can be in a broad range of considerations. So there's a collection of my writing at grandtourideas.com, which is a sample platter. It's very brief, one page, but there are links to other more extensive writings. Typically at this point are Google pages where I put them because they're easy to find and I can edit them on the go, and hopefully we'll expand into a book. And the current project is phenombook.com. So I'm shortening the word phenomenology, which is this, you could say, social science and philosophy of studying the structure of our experiences, which has a rich history to it. And I'm relating to it as the phenomena of the here and now, the power of now, you could say, as Eckhart Tolle's work, and also to other aspects of being able to sort of be in the moment, whether related to Deepak Chopra, Les Brown, Dr. David Jubb's work, Jiddu Krishnamurti, or Letting Go's book, Guy Finley. These are things that in the immediate, you could say, framework in my own cosmology, like the orbit of my mind of thoughts, influence this. So in relating what we're talking about in consciousness, and we're going to wrap up in a little bit here, I'm just reviewing some common usage definitions that are found in Webster's Third New International Dictionary from 1966 that describes consciousness as follows. And this is now the fourth definition that's just describing waking life, and in parentheses, as that to which one returns after sleep, trance, fever, wherein all one's mental powers have returned. Now, that lends itself to believe to certain levels of consciousness at the basic level that we can relate to. On the phenom level, we're having an experience, and if we can relate to each other as social scientists, we can share different perspectives, and understanding it's going to be informed from our position, our point of view, opinions that were given to us, perhaps past experience relating to you or what I did in regards to the past, and maybe you could say inept attempts to try to have a breakthrough in communication that hopefully would be a new work, such as loving conversations that would help engage people to have more meaningful relationships and to break through whatever situations, dilemmas, obstacles, limitations that have prevented it from going through, but not from a point of view like me no better than thou or some authority figure, but like curiosity that entices the consciousness to expand in a way that bridges the gap and allows for this increased sense of awareness as a mental power to return to sensibility. And whether you're going to call it normalcy, so it's like we can have normal relationships. We're talking about the polarity in our society or in the world, that we can appreciate other people's opinions and yet have a sense that we want to go beyond just having a thought about something to what is meaningful and what's the quality of engagement that's going to allow to a conscious breakthrough. This, to me, leads to this quantum, quote-unquote, breakthrough potential. And it begins studying the phenom. What is it that we're experiencing in the here and now? And how can I be more, quote-unquote, consciously aware of it so I can appreciate it, share it, in the regard that in the way that we can see things, as social scientists, we can share, and perhaps there could be a little bit of debate, but interesting enough, go, that's interesting, to have a conscious community conversation. And this was my graduate work, my dissertation, communityconversations.com. And the way that we come together to appreciate community, the connotations of what it is to be in community, who shows up, what's the quality of content, and what does it mean to be in community? This is a consciousness consideration. So the last definition, again, relating to Webster's Third World International Dictionary, and then we'll talk about the Cambridge English Dictionary. Number 5 here is the part of mental life where it's psychic content. In psychoanalysis, I said, I'm tired. I gotta go to sleep soon. This is my second full day being back from New York City, but I was there for 2 weeks. And that was a quantum consciousness experience in itself on many different levels. However, in my own race, really strictly speaking, in my own lane, right? Expressing sort of this as a social science and not being taken anyway, being asexual and just sort of keeping with it for 7 years now as a straight track to try to absorb what I can. Not to say I've studied as hard as I can or read as much material as I can. It's just what's the path I'm on and what I'm following through on that makes this part of the mental life or psychic content. And I'm not into, psychoanalysis like Freudian points of view or Jung. I'm just looking at what becomes immediately available to consciousness. So what you say maybe perhaps relates to the ego is how they defined it in 1966. It can be compared to pre-conscious or what's unconscious that then is unfolding to become aware of, that's allowing some hopefully higher level functioning. When by higher level, we're talking about being functional. And the ultra beingness is sort of maximizing this potential to where you're the best you can be. Again, not being uber or superior or, ranking things, although we can make choices, conscious choices in what we choose to affiliate or vote with our dollars to put into our environment or into our pocket or into our stomachs or into our, bodily self-image. these things we can become more appreciative of and aware in what I'm conceiving as the quality of thought, word, and act. Now, the Cambridge English Dictionary defines consciousness as the state of understanding and realizing something. So, quote unquote, the state of understanding and realizing something. Now, the Oxford Living Dictionary defines consciousness as the state of being aware of and responsive to one's surrounding, such as a person's awareness or perception of something. And the fact of awareness by the mind of itself and the world. Now, that's pretty good, right? So we're having a fact of having a sense of awareness, and it's conjectured by the mind, right? So I'm having some mental, hopefully not breakdown, but experience of something, and recognizing this is part of the mess. What's going on in my mind, how I'm entertaining it, how I'm related to it energetically, emotionally, and the spatial construct, and where there is a relationship dynamic that's also informing the quality of my time. And that's the mess. And what makes it messed up in that way, where I'm sort of stuck in some kind of analysis or giving an opinion or judgment on it, and labeling it, it's causing me to sort of go off in some direction, whether it's a mood cycle or reaction or fear that's preventing me from moving forward, even though there might be some curiosity. People say, well, didn't curiosity kill the cat? But like Herman Munster said, satisfaction brought it back, at least for 7 or 8 times. And this, you could say, continuous, curious cycle is something that plays out where we come back to something that maybe we haven't become clear about, something we haven't fully understood. And there is sort of, whether it is curiosity or a corresponding element in this quantum dynamic, or whatever that would be for you, to explore it. And that is part of the phenomenon, this phenomenon, experiencing the here and now, and being able to relate it, again, as social scientists or as friends, or people who are concerned about community and the quality of our conversations with each other, to have this dynamic, to be able to relate to it on a very good level. Now, philosophers have attempted to clarify technical distinctions by using various jargon, like I'm doing, of their own. And I don't mean to go into some kind of technical language, because I'm not the scientist on that kind of level to explain quantum dynamics or any type of theory other than what I sometimes reference to in my writing, because I was taught in order to get that degree in academia, your ideas could be really out there, drmike.org, but you have to relate it to something in existence to give it a foundation that other people can agree, okay, I get something, and now I'm going to contrast it to your other ideas that you again relate to something that again becomes meaningful, perhaps. So yeah, I'm coming up with terms or some sort of jargon, and whether there is an existing technical definition or meta language, or language about language, in the context of a terminology that's so specialized and associated to what explaining consciousness or any particular field of endeavor is, or a particular activity that you would engage in, whether it's sports or being in a lab or whatever it is that you function as. The jargon is normally employed in a particular communicative context, and it may not be well understood outside the context. So that's why in writing the book Phenom, I'm relating to phenomenology, hoping in a way that people can get it while appreciating its history and where it's taken us to for my own personal understanding and hope for the quantum leap. So again, phenombook.com. All right, let's wrap it up for a little bit. You know, there's so much we can go into, such as just like, well, what is really consciousness? So just talk really quickly about this from the Routledge Encyclopedia of Philosophy. So the Routledge Encyclopedia of Philosophy, this is from 1988. Consciousness. Philosophers have used the term consciousness for 4 main topics: knowledge in general, intentionality, introspection, and the knowledge it specifically generates from this introspection, because I'm going to have some aha moments, hopefully, right? And then the phenomenal experience. Now, I'm hoping for some breakthroughs on this, because obviously, as quote-unquote social scientist, drmike.org, I'm looking for some kind of breakthrough to have integrated relationships that are so profound that we can we can equate into the phenomenon on a quantum consciousness scale where we just get it and we experience it, whether it's felt or dynamic that is divined, sort of just, I don't want to get too woo-woo metaphysical or anything, yet metaphysical is fine in philosophy, that there is something of a sense. And whether we're just looking at things generally in the topics of the four main topics, knowledge in general, intentionality, the introspection, and the knowledge that it specifically generates for me in my own phenomenon experience, this is phenomenon. This is something within one's own mind and is introspectively conscious. So So if we're having a practice of something of presence and how I, whether it's the ego projection or what I perceive to be the self in my own experience, the way I'm showing up in the quantum, in the phenomenon, which is the here and now experience, I'm understanding myself in the experience of having an experience of self, who I am, what I'm feeling, what I'm sensing. And in this regard, now I'm doing this and explaining this definition, I'm breaking this apart as I'm explaining the definition of how consciousness is explained as a corresponding entry in the Rutledge Encyclopedia of Philosophy. So this is an experience, or if you want to name it as an other mental entity, that is phenomenally conscious, just in case there is something it is like for one to have this conscious experience. So if we're going to call it the it of experience, to have a consciousness about it, and to have consciousness, to be conscious of your conscious experience. So the observer being observed. And again, it's tricky because we can go into judgment or go, oh man, not a good hair day. I don't even see myself because I'm just relating to you. The clearest examples are perpetual experience and relating to what's messed up, to have some kind of sense of, whether it's the mass trance, what's unfolding in the rigmarole, or the messed experience of what's the matter mentally, whether we're talking about money, the mind experience of itself, right? And how I'm engaging it emotionally and what's felt energetically is going to have a spatial context to how I'm relating to it, and the feeling, colloidal sculpting of how my environment, whether it's cluttered or I'm okay that you're in my space, man, or I'm invading it, or something is interfering in that dynamic, affects the relationship spatially, and then the time, where it's a temporality of our here and now that's informing the phenomenon, at least in this conjuncture. And I was thinking about this earlier today, that we're having the phenomenon, book.com, so the experience of the here and now, how we're relating to it, there can be different phenomena. Your experience of the here and now can be quite different from mine, particularly if you're related on that mesh scale and temporality. You might be relating to me, or how you associate to me if you have some experience, perhaps with me in the past, very different, that you're having to filter through to who I am perceived to be now, thinking, man, that guy has really gone off the rails, or man, superstructures of manipulating the mind, he's become a master at. I don't know. The conjecture, though, can be profound. Because I've examined the ego, I've kind of lessened the ego. And people can come at me from all different directions. There are things I definitely stand for, and I want to have to be clear on things, to be able to explain them. Still the appreciation for what the experience is. The ego tends to be removed, because who is this entity that's experiencing it? I'm going to be relating it to yesterday is no longer fitting into the conjecture of today. And yet I'm wanting to bring people in from my past to go, hey, I appreciate you for who you are, what you meant to me, and our relationship, perhaps skewed or otherwise. Look at this. Isn't this interesting? Isn't it fascinating? Because you're part of the inspiration. You're part of the reason that I'm doing this, because I want to filter and divine something that's going to take us to the next level. Now, of course, there has to be the tie principle. People have some kind of take on it, and where they're willing to experience something, to take the time to explore it, because they have the interest in it and they understand the intention. And this experience is informed again by the quality of energy and what we're experiencing affecting the environment, which is my term for environment, but it is environment to where I'm putting input and I'm getting feedback, there's reflection, there's this introspection. This is informing this quantum conscious experience, which we'll explore in future talks. Again, the current book I'm working on is phenombook.com, Phenom book.com. And it's reviewing the science philosophy of phenomenology. I talk about it as a social science, as being a science in the sense that I'm using a CARES model of community action research, examining the quality of engagement to refine, define, or divine enlightenment as a best practice to understand, you could say, in the best practice of being conscious, in the way that one shows up, communicates, that it is in this refinement aspect of what we're experiencing as the phenom, the here and now. So in a way, we could almost stop right here and there, but we could say the clearest examples are this perpetual existence of what I describe as what's up, UP. It's universal in some level, whether we're there in recognition of it so we can experience and recognize the quantum state, of consciousness. It's still the element that we are conscious of something, whether we want to give it a label, maybe it's a low level. My mother often used to talk about how gutter culture, because she came from Europe, and talked about how some things were of a lower level because it represents destruction or something that's not quite appreciative or refined in the way of thinking or coming to something in appreciation where it might be just disposable. I thought that was pretty profound, right? And we all have our considerations of things. And again, making conscious choices, voting with our dollar, giving time, interest, introspection, and examination to what qualifies in this regard. And again, a quality qualification is this XP, marriage of IQ and EQ, that produces the XQ as a quotient of what this quality of expression is and how it comes across. Is this current level of introspection and work that I'm exploring, right? And so phenomenality, while it may seem independent or disassociable, like all of this stuff, depending where you're taking it from, can be controversial unless you're willing to take the leap to consider the potentiality of us being of a realm of superconsciousness. Now, we're not talking about putting implants in or doing AI. Maybe it's all going to be affecting one day like that. Maybe, but can we, wherever we are at now, at our stage of life, or our ability to be curious, whether philosophically or just wanting to have this breakthrough in a relationship that becomes a driving dynamic, is it something that's heartfelt in the way to explore something? Or again, because curiosity killed the cat, but satisfaction brought it back, you want more. And this can be a good thing if we're looking to make a community contribution to raise this conscious level, to consider a desirable, sustainable future that's equitable, egalitarian view, that's fair for all of us to be a bit more attuned, to have the opportunity, to have access to resources in the right way, get plugged into some of these ideas that could be meaningful and allow for a breakthrough. These are the quantum consciousness considerations of the phenom, the experience of this here and now. So next time we'll talk about traditional metaphors for mind, and we'll look at how during the early 19th century the emerging field of geology inspired a particular metaphor that, like the mind, likewise has hidden layers, which you could say recorded the past of individuals. And by 1875, which there really were, quote unquote, psychologists at that time, they believed that consciousness was but a small part of mental life. And this idea underlies the goal of Freudian therapy to expose the unconscious layer of the mind and what that would lead to. So whether we're attracted or repulsed to certain ideas, some people feel they're like magnets, we're being drawn to them. Other people say it's just sort of this concept like John Stuart Mill talked about back in the day of a mental chemistry and mental compounds. So these are things that we'll talk about, and we will engage it, and we'll go from introspection to awareness and examine where it leads us. So again, I'm drmike.org, taking sort of the slice of life in this dynamic. I hope you found something of interest here. My second full day back from my New York trip. I've got a lot to catch up on, but hopefully you found this really of interest. Amazingly, I didn't even check the time, but we are really right on the hour mark. So just again, to quick sum up, we're examining the phenomenology, which is the structures of experience that I'm writing about as the phenom here and now, phenomenbook.com. And I want to relate it to how we become a bit more aware and attuned and consciously aware so we can live better lives. Again, drmike.org, communityconversations.com. Thank you.